To understand the Melungeon mystery, we must travel back to 1784, deep in the mountains of eastern Tennessee. A land surveyor named John Sevier was charting the frontier when he stumbled upon something that made him stop dead in his tracks. Hidden along remote ridges were families living in log cabins, families unlike any Sevier had ever seen. Their skin ranged from a warm copper to olive tones. Their hair was straight and black, their features sharply European, yet their eyes, noses, and cheekbones hinted at a lineage that defied simple categorization. They spoke English, but it had a rhythm and vocabulary that sounded almost ancient. Sevier recorded in his journal that these families claimed to be Portuguese, but to him they looked nothing like the Portuguese people he had ever met. They called themselves Melungeons, a name that would puzzle historians, linguists, and genealogists for centuries. The Melungeons had lived in Appalachia for generations, quietly shaping lives in isolation. They were neither white, nor black, nor Native American. In early America, where rigid racial lines dictated opportunity and safety, not fitting into a category could be dangerous, even deadly. The Melungeons were mountain dwellers whose origins were shrouded in mystery. Some believed they were descendants of Portuguese sailors shipwrecked along the Carolina coast. Others told stories of Turkish slaves who escaped Spanish galleys, or of settlers connected to the lost colony of Roanoke. Outsiders were less kind, labeling them triracial isolates, a derogatory term implying a mixture of runaway slaves, Native Americans, and white outlaws. Despite centuries of prejudice, the Melungeons maintained a distinct culture. They farmed the rugged land, hunted the forests, and preserved family traditions, language, and customs that outsiders could barely understand. Their isolation became both a shield and a prison, preserving unique genetics, but also exposing them to extreme hardship. The first major blow to the Melungeons came in 1834, when Tennessee passed a new constitution. The law declared that only free white persons could vote, own land, or testify in court. Families who had long farmed the mountains suddenly found themselves legally classified as free persons of color. This reclassification had immediate consequences. Melungeon children were banned from public schools. Families lost land they had held for decades because the courts would no longer recognize their claims. Entire communities were pushed further into the mountains, onto steep ridges where the soil was poor, and survival became a daily struggle. The story of Vardy Collins illustrates the cruel consequences of this system. Vardy was a Melungeon and a war hero, having fought in the War of 1812. In 1846, a white neighbor claimed Vardy's 300-acre farm belonged to him. When Vardy went to court to defend his property, the judge ruled that as a person of color, he could not testify in his own defense. Vardy lost everything. His family was forced to relocate higher into the mountains, onto land no white settler wanted. Across Appalachia, this pattern repeated. Melungeons survived by hunting, gathering herbs, and producing moonshine, the few avenues left to earn cash in an economy that excluded them. Isolation shaped the Melungeon population in profound ways. Dr. Virginia DeMar, who spent 40 years studying Melungeon genealogy, discovered that most of today's 200,000 Melungeons descend from just 15 original families: the Collins, Gibson, Goins, Minor, Mullins, and others. Church records from Newman's Ridge in Tennessee show the same surnames appearing generation after generation. A Gibson might marry a Collins, their daughter a Mullins, and their son another Gibson. This pattern of intermarriage was not preference, it was survival. Marrying outside the community risked violence, social exclusion, and legal persecution. The Melungeons' appearance often defied classification. Many displayed the Anatolian bump, a knob on the back of the skull common in Mediterranean populations. Others had almond-shaped, slightly Asian-looking eyes combined with European noses. Some families exhibited polydactyly, a genetic trait resulting in extra fingers or toes. Medical anomalies were equally unusual. Diseases like Mediterranean fever, Behçet's disease, and thalassemia appeared in Melungeon communities but were rare in surrounding Appalachian populations. Their unique traits fueled curiosity and prejudice alike, as outsiders struggled to explain their existence. In 2002, Dr. Kevin Jones of the University of Virginia launched the Melungeon DNA Project, collecting samples from 120 people whose families had been identified as Melungeon for generations. The results confirmed what many suspected. The Melungeons were unlike any other American population.
Y chromosome results, analysis of the Y chromosome, passed from father to son, revealed astonishing diversity. 30% carried haplogroup R1b, common in Western Europe. 25% carried haplogroup E, originating in Africa. 15% carried haplogroup J, found mainly in the Middle East. 10% carried haplogroup Q, marking Native American ancestry. 20% included lineages from Central Asia, India, and the Mediterranean. This genetic mosaic showed that the Melungeons were not simply a triracial mix, but a complex blend of ancestries from across the globe. Mitochondrial DNA, inherited from mothers, was equally diverse. European haplogroups like H and U appeared alongside African L1 and L2, Native American A, B, C, and D, and rarer South Asian and Middle Eastern haplogroups M and N. No other American population displayed this level of diversity. Even communities known for mixing, such as Louisiana Creoles or Brazilian Pardos, had more predictable patterns. The Melungeons' genetic signatures suggested centuries of intercontinental ancestry, preserved in isolation high in the Appalachian Mountains. The mystery of the Melungeons begins to unravel when we look back to colonial America in the 1600s and early 1700s. Before strict racial laws hardened society into rigid categories, life in the colonies was surprisingly fluid. People from different continents, cultures, and backgrounds frequently crossed paths, traded, and intermarried. Portuguese and Spanish sailors often jumped ship in Virginia ports. Turkish and Arab galley slaves escaped from Mediterranean vessels, while free African craftsmen lived and worked alongside European indentured servants. Native Americans traded, hunted, and occasionally intermarried with these newcomers. One remarkable case involves John Collins, recorded in the 1640s Virginia. A Turk by birth, he married a Native American woman, and their children later married into families of Portuguese sailors and free African landowners. By 1750, their descendants were established farmers in frontier regions that would become Tennessee and Kentucky. Another line traces to Portuguese Ishmael, who appeared in North Carolina in 1690. He married the daughter of a Native American chief and an escaped African woman. Their grandchildren, in turn, married descendants of Mediterranean sailors and English settlers. These weren't isolated incidents. Research by Dr. Tim Hashow identifies at least 50 mixed families in colonial Virginia and North Carolina who eventually became recognized as Melungeon. These early settlers shared common characteristics. They were free people of color, often landowners, skilled in trades like blacksmithing and carpentry. They moved to the frontier as racial laws tightened in coastal areas, bringing with them a legacy of cultural and genetic diversity that would endure for centuries. The Melungeons developed a unique survival strategy in response to the discrimination and legal obstacles they faced: ethnic shifting. This was the ability to adjust racial identity depending on circumstances, a skill honed over generations. A Melungeon man might present himself as Portuguese when applying for a marriage license, Indian when avoiding military conscription, and white when attempting to vote. Census records reveal how families were classified differently over time: free-colored in 1830, mulatto by 1840, Indian in 1850, and sometimes white after relocating in 1860. This wasn't deceit, it was a matter of survival. Being legally classified as non-white carried enormous consequences. In Tennessee, free people of color paid triple the taxes of whites. In Virginia, permits were required to own guns or even dogs. In North Carolina, Melungeons could not testify against white citizens, leaving them vulnerable to theft, violence, and exploitation. Education posed the greatest challenge. Children were barred from white schools and rarely welcomed in black schools. Some mountain communities created their own schools, but without tax support, they often lacked teachers, textbooks, and resources. By 1900, the illiteracy rate in Melungeon communities reached 90%, a stark testament to the systemic barriers they faced. The Civil War brought both hope and peril for the Melungeons. The Confederacy conscripted many into labor battalions, effectively slave work, while the Union Army often viewed their mixed appearance with suspicion. Many men hid in mountain caves for the entire war, emerging only at night to tend hidden gardens or care for families. Some Melungeons joined the Union Army, hoping victory would bring recognition and equality. Jordan Gibson from Hancock County enlisted in the 8th Tennessee Infantry. He survived 14 battles, only to return home and find that his race still barred him from voting. His pension applications were repeatedly denied. Reconstruction initially offered promise. The 14th and 15th Amendments should have guaranteed rights, but once federal troops withdrew, Southern states quickly found new ways to exclude Melungeons. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses prevented them from voting well into the mid-20th century. The early 1900s brought new threats. The Eugenics movement, obsessed with racial purity, turned its attention to the Melungeons. Scientists and officials treated these families like laboratory specimens. Arthur Estabrook of the Carnegie Institution published reports in 1926 branding Melungeons as a dangerous element, prone to feeble-mindedness and criminality. This wasn't just academic prejudice, it had real consequences. Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924 classified anyone with even a single drop of non-white blood as colored. Generations of Melungeons who had successfully passed as white were suddenly exposed. Birth certificates were altered, marriages were invalidated, children were expelled from white schools.
Walter Plecker, Virginia's Registrar of Vital Statistics, became obsessed with identifying Melungeons. He kept lists of suspect surnames and sent agents to mountain communities to examine school children, checking fingernails, hair texture, and even the so-called Melungeon bump on the skull. One of the most heartbreaking stories involves the Ramsey family of Wise County. They had successfully integrated into white society. Their children attended college, and the family ran businesses in town. In 1943, an anonymous tip led Plecker to reclassify the Ramseys as Melungeon. Overnight, the consequences were devastating. Children were expelled from college, the father lost business contracts, and a daughter's white fiancé broke off the engagement. The family fled to Ohio, changed their names, and never spoke of their heritage again. This pattern repeated hundreds of times. Melungeon families scattered across the United States, passing as white, black, Mexican, Italian, anything but Melungeon. Family photos and records were destroyed. For a culture that had survived 2 centuries of mountain isolation, it seemed on the brink of erasure. By the 1990s, a new generation began asking questions. Why did grandmother look different from neighbors? Why were certain relatives off limits? Why did Great-Aunt Martha insist they were Portuguese despite appearances? The internet became a lifeline. Descendants who believed they were alone discovered thousands of others with similar stories. Websites like the Melungeon Heritage Association allowed families to reconnect, share photographs, reconstruct genealogies, and preserve oral histories. Consumer DNA testing further transformed the landscape. For less than $100, anyone could discover their ancestry, and countless Americans who considered themselves simply white or black suddenly uncovered surprising ethnicities. Genetic analysis confirmed the enduring impact of centuries of isolation and intermarriage. Certain mutations, unique to Melungeon families, act like fingerprints, tracing descent back to the original colonial settlers.
Doctors in Appalachian hospitals now routinely ask about Melungeon heritage when diagnosing rare conditions. And cultural rediscovery is equally vibrant. Food traditions, mountain folk music, and unique dialects are being studied and celebrated. Words like Saigoglin, crooked or leaning, and Jasper, stranger or outsider, are linguistic relics of a centuries-old colonial mixing pot. Today, Melungeon identity is complex. Some embrace it fully, attending heritage festivals and joining genealogy groups. Others, particularly older generations, remain reluctant, carrying the deep-seated fear passed down by grandparents who lost everything for their ancestry.